You may be seated. It's good to see you, and it's good to be with you. I feel a lot of gratitude in this moment, and a gratitude that I've come to be familiar with, because week in and week out, I get to see y'all, and we get to hear the gospel and come to the table of the Lord together. And so thank you. Thank you. I think part of the reason I'm acutely aware of it in this moment is because, as Katie can attest, it's been a day. It's been a stressful day, and we're fine, but just one of those days in which things just can't get right, you know? And I'm grateful for the kind of presence of moment that we're brought to together. I'm going to talk, and I'm sorry to disappoint, I'm not going to preach tonight out of Job or Psalm 22. So I know that, I know that you wanted the heavy, and was it one of Leonard Cohen's? You want it darker? Anyways, I know that, but sorry. And I know that's my typical MO, but I won't go there tonight. But what I am going to do instead is I'm going to primarily focus on the gospel text, or rather part of the gospel text, then maybe a bit of Hebrews. And I think what I have to say is going to be relatively brief tonight. And God's people said amen. And I think in part because part of what I've realized in this sermon is that this is in one way, I think, a sermon I've already begun, and I'm going to keep coming back to over and over again. And so it feels like, well, I can't say everything I need to say. You never can in any one sermon, but I definitely can't in this one. And so I think I should give myself more opportunities by saying less tonight and hopefully coming back to it in the future. Nevertheless, there is some good news to be shared. It is interesting. I mean, there's a lot that's fascinating about this story in Mark's gospel, the story of the rich young ruler. We've probably heard it before if you've spent any time around church. We think he's probably the ruler of a synagogue. Like, that's the kind of shape his authority takes. And he comes to Jesus, good teacher, and Jesus has this line, this strange kind of line, well, there's none that's good, none except the Father. If you've read our dear and dearly missed Bishop's book, All Things Beautiful, he has a little riff on that, on this thing about goodness, and in that book. And part of what he contends is he brings back to memory the language in John's gospel. Whoever has seen me has seen the Father, right? Jesus says. And so when he challenges this man and says, why do you call me good? Jesus, Bishop Chris says in his book, images the Father precisely by refusing to be a static object of adoration. He images the Father precisely in refusing to be a static object of adoration. And this is why he is not only a body who can be seen and heard and touched, but a way of seeing and hearing and touching. You might have heard this elsewhere. I've said something similar, right? That Jesus isn't one person in the room that we can see. Christ gives us vision to see everyone and everything more clearly and rightly and faithfully. To look at him rightly is to look along him at God and neighbor, to see in and with and through them and everything else. So he doesn't just allow us to simply gaze, but actually redirects our gaze so that we see ourselves and one another differently. That's a good sermon. I think we could probably end there. I won't. Because that was Bishop Chris's. This is not his sermon. This is my sermon. what I'm struck by is the word of impossibility here, and the word that with God all things are possible. We'll come to the latter in a moment, but I think about those impossibilities for us. And the reason I want to wait to come to with God all things are possible is because probably for most of us, we're actually pretty tempted to pull Jesus' punch here. And we're like, yeah, we get it. It's impossible. Wink, wink. We got you. And probably most of us have heard sermons that are pretty heavy on the all things are possible with God. I have distinct memories whenever I hear this language or language that's used similarly elsewhere in Philippians about Christ, right? And my mind immediately goes back to when I was part of the time as a teenager. We lived in Maine, in Portland, Maine, and for part of that time I went to a Christian high school. And I remember in our athletic programs that language was always there, first and foremost. Yeah, that was right. Expect a miracle. Yeah. I had a growth spurt in college, so that at time, 5'8.5" white kid, I knew for sure my vertical could get me to that rim. Because all things, right? Yeah, I know. We've done a great disservice to our children, especially those who are so mediocre in athletics. Bless our hearts. But the truth is, there are things that are impossible. I'm not just talking about athletic abilities. I mean things in life that are impossible. Like this rich young ruler who is, because of both his power and his riches that have inflamed his passions in such a way, it really is impossible for him to sell all that he has and follow after Christ. The punch is there. We should let it land. There are things that are actually, in truth, not just seemingly impossible, but impossible for us. And I think this runs counter. I think there's an important distinction, but this runs counter to some of the narrative that we've adopted, that we want to say, well, it seems impossible, but it's not really. But I think it's okay to kind of rest in a certain way, the sort of blessed impossibilities that we face, that are just part of being human in this world that we inhabit. Jesus here in this text is talking about the ways that our attachments, the passions that are, of course, here aroused by riches, keep us from following the Spirit. We are tied up and tied down. We're tethered to weights that won't let us respond as we truly want to respond. I think about some of the lines in Romans 7. I do the things that I don't want to do. I think about our confession, Lord, forgive us for those things that we've done and that we have left undone. That left undone is doing a lot of work in the confession, isn't it? Ways that we are bound and we just can't respond in ways that we truly want to respond. And I'm not trying to be optimistic there about our nature. Let's take seriously the weight of sin, the fractured nature of our lives. But if it's true that we have been made by God and that we're made in God's image, then what is truer still and deeper still is that it is toward God that our life is directed. That all of our passions, no matter how misguided, no matter how misused, no matter how splintered, that the truth of it is that all of it is toward God. Toward the ground of our being, toward the source of our life, the one who, yes, is our creator, but is also our end. Our end is in the life of God. When we see him, we will be made like him. All of our desire is heavenward in that respect. Most truly, ultimately. So what are the things in life that seem most impossible, especially as it relates to our passions, our desires, our deep, deep inclinations. Where are our loves? What are they directed toward? Who and what? Our love, our joy, our delighting, our hope and our despair, our courage and our fear. Where is it that these passions are directed? Where is it that they are the way that they are in ways that it makes other things impossible? I think, to give an example, I think there's all kinds of ways we see this in our life together. There's ways that we can love one another that go awry, that keep us from actually loving in a truer sense, in a more faithful sense. Our boys are young, just a toddler and a 3-month-old. But already I know the way that I feel about them, the affection that I have for them. And there's something that kind of makes sense to me about those parents that, scare quotes here, love too much. So much so that they kind of a little bit possessive of their children's lives. Because you're a kid and I know what's best for you. And even when you're 25, I still probably know what's best for you. Of course, we've seen the ways that fractures relationships and hurts the possibility of kind of people coming into their own. Again, coming into their own in true ways, in ways that require us to love one another and live lives together that bring one another into deeper freedom and liberty. I think about my own life. I think about the ways that I have a deep, deep desire to make things right. I don't mean in the sense of justice, though I hope that that's there. I think that that's there, but I mean in the ways that can sometimes cause us and cause me to overreach, to try to fix, to kind of lay my hands on things and on people that it's just not what's being asked of me. It's meant well. I care about them. I want them to know my care, but also I really want to help. There are things in me, there are things in all of us that if we're honest with ourselves, it makes it impossible for us to always and at all times follow after Christ in the ways that God is asking of us. Do you know those things for yourself? You probably can think of some. You can probably think of some of the ways that your desires are able to keep you bound. Ways that there are things that, even if they come from good places, present impossibilities in maybe what God is asking of you. Maybe you're someone who has people in your life that you need to care for, and because of that, it causes you to be guarded, because your time, your energies, your efforts, your love, it has to be spent here. And maybe God is calling you to hospitality, to open those gates of your heart a bit more widely. But because of your commitment here, I just can't. What are those impossibilities? If you don't know those, I know some. There are things that come to mind, things that I carry heavily even right now in my heart. But I don't know them all. And you probably don't either. But Christ does. I don't know if you caught it in the words of the gospel. As Deacon Rob read it. And Jesus looked at him and he loved him. Jesus looks at you, looks at me, looks at us, sees us, and loves us. And sees us in ways that cut to the quick, that open us right up. He sees the depths of those things, including those impossibilities that I'm talking about. Think about our passage in Hebrews. The word of God is living and active. It's sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing until it divides soul from spirit, joint from marrow. It's able to judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart. The thoughts and the intentions of the heart. Before him no creature is hidden. All are naked and laid bare to the eyes of the one to whom we must render an account. But of course, the high priest that we have and the one to whom we must render an account is a one who knows us and knows us in our weakness, including knows us in our weaknesses and knows those things which are impossible for us. And so, because of who he is and what he's done in becoming flesh and dwelling among us, the author of Hebrews says, "Let us therefore approach the throne of grace with boldness so that we may receive mercy and find grace and help in time of need." So when we run up against our impossibilities, it might be a good time to go to the Lord in prayer and say, "God, you know me. I need your grace. This is impossible for me. I cannot love in the ways that you have called me. I cannot follow in the ways that you have called me. The gates of my heart are stuck. And I need you to break them down." But I think not just about this for us or us personally, but also what about for St. Mary's? Again, I think we've been getting at this in our language, in the ways that we've talked about our own namesake, our patron saint, Mary. And indeed the Marys. But being the kind of people who can be there at the cross with Christ. Being a place where we are hospitable, where we are open, where we in full agency will say, "Let it be unto me according to your word, O Lord." And I don't mean to be pessimistic, so please don't mishear me. But it is impossible for us to be a place of complete peace. It is impossible to be a space that is safe, but not simply neutral in our safety. To be a place of healing, not just healthy. Not just being concerned with being healthy. And I mean, that's the thing, right, with churches, the healthy church. But not just healthy, and maybe not even primarily concerned about that at all, but a place of healing. Real healing to all who come and who are in need of it. A community, a church, where people aren't handled or used. Where we live with one another in ways that are appropriate and fitting. True to the truth of who we are and who we are together. Again, safe. I said this word last week in the sermon, safe, and it surprised me when I said it, because I don't actually use that word from the pulpit. Perhaps I should, but the reason I don't is because of how it's often apprehended, and I can't help but think of that, the line in the Chronicles of Narnia, right? Mr. Beaver says, he's not safe, but he's good, speaking of Aslan. And I love that, and I've kind of attached something to that. And so I'm like, yeah, not safe, but good. But, of course, we can speak about this in a nuanced way. There are ways in which we do need to be safe. We do need to be safe for the most vulnerable and for the places in our hearts that are the most vulnerable places. Yes, St. Mary's should be safe. But all of this is impossible. And again, not to be pessimistic, but that is impossible. To be that all the time, and for all who God would bring us, that is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. Yes, because of all of our riches, our theological, our spiritual, our liturgical, our relational riches, there are real impossibilities for us. But with God, all things are possible. Really, what we're talking about here is truly being a sanctuary, a home, the Lord's house. With God, all things are possible, and that doesn't mean that anything and everything we want will happen the way that we want it to happen, okay? It is true, I never dunked. So I know that's probably surprising to you. But yes, there are things that will not happen and won't take place the ways that we want them to. But it does mean that God withholds no good thing from us. And whatever thing, however bad, cannot keep God's good from being there for us. Part of what's so interesting in the gospel text that we read is that Jesus has this point where he makes this distinction. Truly, I tell you, there is no one who has left house or brother or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for my sake and for the sake of the good news who will not receive 100-fold. And then you wait for it in heaven, right? No. Now in this age, Jesus says. Now in this age. Yes, and in the age to come. True enough. There's this another rendering of this, an interpretive translation of this passage, which I just got a kick out of. Jesus said, "Mark my words, no one who sacrifices house, brothers, sisters, mother, father, children, land, whatever, because of me and the message, will lose out. They'll get it all back. Multiplied many times," and I think this helps get the point across even better, "in homes, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, and land." Well, how can you gain more mothers? In the ways that we know are true. In the ways that we gain mothers in the faith, brothers, sisters, places that become homes for us and for our weary hearts, land where we might find rest. We're not talking about possession here or possessions. We're talking about deeper things than those things that we possess. But this translation also says this: they'll get it back multiplied in many times, on and on and on, but also in troubles. But also in troubles. Yes. God will not withhold any good thing from us. And he will not withhold any good thing from us now and in this life. We're not talking about shallow kind of desire for more, insatiable appetites to possess. We're talking about the transformation of our very desires, the sanctification of our imaginations and of our desires, such that we might be the kind of people who live in the world and say, my mother, my brother, my father, my sister, this place is a home. The kinds of eyes to see the truth of what the Lord is doing in our midst and in our life together. Ways that we might love one another more faithfully, that we might, like Christ, see each other and love one another. I'll finish with this. It's funny, in the gospel book that we have, it actually left this final verse off that was in our reading for today, verse 31 in Mark 10. But many who are first will be last, and the last will be first. And so here's what I want to leave you with this word, with these blessed impossibilities, and looking to and calling upon the God with whom all things are possible. Who is the one who is first and last? He is the one who holds all things. He holds us. Amen.